everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. And we are going to be talking about how to manage like a difficult boss. And we have an expert here, Bruce Tolgan, who wrote this book, It's Okay to Manage Your Boss. And we're going to be talking about scenarios that I hear often. And I actually did some research on the web on like what are the most typical scenarios of challenging bosses. And I thought we could talk to Bruce to get some advice on what to do if you have certain types of bosses. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me back on your show.
Yeah, you're ending up to be like our one of our like favorites. You just keep on coming back over and over again with all this content.
Well,
It's so great.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Yes, it's been great. All right, so let's talk about bosses, awful things that bosses do. One of the things I worked in a high tech company, and in a high tech company, and I think a lot of companies nowadays, service companies, intellectual property is ending up to be a critical thing. So when you come up with a great idea, when you're in a service industry, any kind of industry, that ends up being like how you're measured. And so, what do you do when your boss steals your idea? So I've seen that happen. I've had that happen. What is your advice if you find yourself in that situation?
Well, sometimes remember your job is to do creative work and it's all intended to be work for hire.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things about being an employee as opposed to being an entrepreneur.
Right.
But, but my advice to anyone in any role in any kind of an organization is for your own reasons and for purposes of tracking your own performance, you should keep good records
Hmm.
of your interactions with your boss and with outside vendors and with
Hmm.
customers and with your subordinates and with your colleagues. And you should keep drafts of your work and subsequent drafts and third drafts and fourth drafts. And whenever you possibly can, you should also, without bragging, try to make it clear to others uh, what you're working on,
Right.
so that it's not just a secret dialogue. You're trapped in a laboratory doing innovative work, and you're like handcuffed to the work table, and only your boss knows you're in there being the creative one. So it's kind of a comprehensive approach. It's staying in dialogue with multiple people, tracking your own performance, keeping drafts of your work, and whenever possible, trying to make it clear to others, your colleagues, other leaders, your boss's boss, vendors, customers. Make it clear what you're working on.
Yeah. You know what I found was interesting when I was working in a corporate environment is that is um there's internal promotion, like internal PR that you have to do, which is to make sure that people know what you're doing. And it's an artful kind of thing because you can't be braggadocious and like, look what I did. I just shipped it. Blah, blah, blah. You can't be doing that all the time. And people are
Right.
probably familiar with that with Facebook, right? If you get too many of those, you're like, oh, give me a break. Some other wonderful
Right.
thing you've done, please. So it's this it's art of talking about the things that you've done, not in a braggy way, but in a way so people know what you're doing, not only in your immediate work group, but work groups outside of your work group. And I think keeping relationships with other types of different functional groups, especially if you're in a large corporation, it's like
Right.
keeping relationships, like you said, with vendors, but also within your company so that they know. Because I think that there's both this internal promotion as well as hoping your boss is going to trumpet your work. And I guess would you have a conversation with your boss? Like I think I would be tended to maybe going to my boss and saying, I think it's great. I know that, we're working as a team and I'm just wondering how, we can share the credit because it makes me more motivated to do my job and do great work. But when I don't, it just feels a little bit off to me. Or I don't know, what would you talk to your boss, do you think?
I mean, it depends on the relationship. my advice to people is be the kind of performer who's not trapped in one relationship with one leader. But as you say, you have to be careful not to seem like you're just bragging. But it's internally with your colleagues, with your subordinates, with other managers, with your boss's boss, outside vendors and customers and clients. So, but again, you have to do it without bragging. So, for
Right.
example, if it's not a secret project you're working on, then
Hmm.
it's easier.
Right.
Sometimes the hardest thing is if it's a secret project.
Right.
And then, there is a limit to how much you can share. But the conversation I think people should have with their boss is more like, hey, that meeting where we're going to discuss this, I'd love to come along and do the presentation since it's my work.
Right.
Let me do that, as opposed to going in and saying, hey, I have a feeling you might be taking credit for my work, right? But that's one way in, and then you want to see how your boss responds to that. Some bosses will be like, "Not necessary. I'll take it from here."
Right.
You know, and then you might not even be CC'd on subsequent communications about it or hear any
Right.
feedback after the meeting. And so, if you start to feel like your boss is unfairly taking credit, then you have to decide what's more important: peace with that particular boss, or making sure that you put a stop to having credit stolen. So
Hmm.
if peace with your immediate boss is what's most important, then you have to walk a very fine line. You have to be very, very careful.
Hmm.
If you start to think, wait a minute, I'm willing to risk that relationship so that I can make sure people know, then what you can do is, electronic communication is a beautiful thing.
Hmm.
One thing you can do is communicate, include other people in your communications about those particular responsibilities or projects, so that, it becomes harder for your boss to steal credit. Another thing you can do is go to someone else. You can go to HR potentially if it
Hmm.
becomes an ongoing problem. You can go to your boss's boss,
Hmm.
and say, hey, I'm not really sure what to do about this.
Right.
Um, or maybe you decide, okay, I'm not going to do anything about this, but I better start doing some manager shopping. And in
Mm.
the end, I better find another manager to work for who doesn't do that. And in the end, when it comes to all of the sort of what I call the jerk boss scenarios, when it comes to those, in most cases, the kind of last resort is, yeah, you better do some manager shopping.
Right. Right. Okay. So, and that seems to be almost with every single scenario that I'm going to present to you. It's,
I
yeah.
mean, that's your worst case
Right.
scenario is
Yeah.
you
Yeah. I think it's going
find
to
people.
HR and then doing some manager shopping and looking around.
Right, right.
Okay, so then another scenario is you have a manager that manages up all the time. So everyone who this person reports to loves this person because they're always catering to whatever their needs are, to the point that they've completely ignored some of the people that they manage below them. What are some ways to work around that? And I think that this is where a lot of these ideas in this book came from, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, most people will find that the further up the chain you go, the more managers are focused on pleasing the executives above them.
Hmm.
And so, what that book, It's Okay to Manage Your Boss, is really all about is we looked into when managers at a high level say, oh, this high performer who works for me, she doesn't need a boss at all.
Right.
And then we'd go interview that person and say, oh no, I need guidance, direction, support, and coaching. It's just that I find a way to get it for myself because my manager doesn't give it to me. You know, and so what self-starting high performers who seem like they don't need a boss do, is they bend over backwards and jump through hoops to try to make sure they understand exactly what's expected of them,
Hmm.
to try to do some of the work of tracking their own performance
Hmm.
and getting feedback either from their immediate boss, in which case they have to go get it.
Hmm.
They have to, and making sure they have the resources they need. If their boss isn't doing that, they
Mm-hmm.
either have to go get it from that boss or go get it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, credit for tangible results. I mean, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, if you're working in an organization, if you have a boss, if you got a job,
Mm-hmm.
you need to make sure you have clear expectations, regular tracking of your performance and feedback about how to improve, an ongoing conversation about how to get the resources you need, and some kind of credit and reward in proportion to your contribution. So what we found in our research is what self-starting high performers do that makes them seem like they don't need a boss is they do a lot of the work of managing themselves,
Right.
but it's not like they're operating blind. They still need to know what's expected and how they're doing in relation to those expectations. It's just that they either extract it from their manager
Mm-hmm.
systematically,
Mm-hmm.
or they get it from another source. So there are a lot of techniques that we teach in our training programs, and that that are in that book. When you're in that position where you're not getting the guidance, direction, support, and coaching you need from your manager, how do you go get it?
Right. And I've
Uh,
usually showed the book, and people said, "What was the name of the book?" So it's okay to manage your manager, and we did. And we actually manage your boss, excuse me. And we actually did an interview too, where I pulled a couple of the ideas that I really liked out of the book too. So you can
yeah,
actually read the book, see the interview, do both. See the interview, see if you want, then take the time to read the book or whatever you want. But I think that that is actually really important. And I think one of the points that you bring up, which is really true, is when you get to VP or above, no one's expecting to manage you anymore. Like someone
right.
was telling me that they were a very high level person in Boeing, and they were having he and this other guy who was in the engineering group, which were the kind of rock stars in Boeing, were having an argument, and so they went to Alan Malawi or whatever his name is, who is the CEO, and they said, we need you to help resolve this. And he said, I will, and this is what the story he told me, which I think exemplifies. He's like, I will help you solve this, but then I'll be wondering, what are you doing for your job? Like, I'll be asking, why aren't you doing your job? But I can resolve this. So do you want me to? Or do you want to figure out how to resolve this on your own? Because I think that that is the
Right.
expectation, right? When you are at that, when you get to the very, very senior levels, no one's going to be managing you anymore. You're going to need to do stuff on your own. The only other idea that I have is that when I work with people who are at that level, they hire a coach because they still need the sounding board. They still want like someone to kick around the ideas with, and they don't have that person. Their boss is not that person, and they're not going to be at that level. So they hire a coach. So that's another
Yeah,
way
I
I think
mean,
to do it.
uh, hiring a coach is a good thing. You got to get the right coach,
Yep.
and of course, you got to get either you got to pay for it or you got to get someone to authorize the funds for it.
Right.
And I think the limitations of a coach, even if you have a really good one,
Mm-hmm.
is they often don't know the particulars of the situation. They
Mm-hmm.
don't know the players. They don't know how things are done, the kind of written rules and unwritten rules of the
Mm-hmm.
organization. And so that those are the limitations. I mean, one thing I recommend is working with other peers and doing
Mm-hmm.
kind of mutual peer mentoring.
Yep.
Sometimes, uh, you know, I do think that most people could get more guidance, direction, support, and coaching out of their immediate boss than they do, even at the higher levels,
Mm-hmm.
even when it's a leader who's reluctant to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the techniques that we teach are about, how you as a performer can get into a rhythm of reporting to that senior leader, reporting to your boss in a systematic way that allows you to extract more guidance, direction, support, and coaching. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're going with your own checklist of hot issues, if your boss doesn't make time for you, you're always trying to get time. If your boss won't make time, then you study your boss's schedule and
Right.
figure out when you can make sneak attacks,
Right,
Uh,
exactly.
and
Go get coffee with them. That's what
well,
my
listen,
husband said. He'd always go like, "Oh, I know I'm going to be able to talk to Lindsay if I say, "Hey, Lindsay, you want to go grab a coffee?" And then he knew he could talk to Lindsay about some, nail down some issues that he'd been hoping Lindsay would nail down, and he hadn't responded in an email, that kind of thing.
yeah, I mean, I had one story, I think it's in the book, of a young person whose boss just had no time. And this young person would go in. She realized that the boss got in early to have some time before things got busy.
Right.
And so she started going in really early. And then the boss says, oh my gosh, so he'd go in and close the door. But she said, I noticed he had this 16-ounce cup of coffee to go in there with. So I knew he had to come out sometime. And she'd have a clipboard and her questions. And she said, he'd come out and she'd just follow him to the men's room and try to knock out as many questions as she could. And then, of course, she couldn't follow him into the men's room. So she'd say, I'll just wait out here for you until you're done. And she said,
The next
eventually,
level, she has to preempt the coffee. Like, oh, it's Starbucks. Well, must be around the corner. Just
right,
get there like 15 minutes beforehand, so she gets some
right,
coffee time and then the pee break.
right, right.
I love it. Okay, all right. So let's talk about some other folks. There's I've worked with a gentleman who is in an R&D group, and he had such a hard time because he had these great ideas, and especially I think in certain professions like an engineering profession, I've noticed that a lot of people are resistant to change. And so it's like, let's just, especially old established companies like Boeing or companies like this engineer was not at Boeing, but it was a really big long-standing manufacturing company, and he'd had ideas, and he said it was really 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 hard to basically come up with any new ideas or changes. So, what do you do when you're in a situation like that?
Well, my first piece of advice is do not present every idea you have. So, uh, that's the number one
Is
piece
that
of
your
advice.
millennial advice, or just or do you think that people who are ideas people present too many ideas?
Well, millennials might be more inclined to be like, I'm an ideas guy,
Yeah.
you know, but uh, but but anyone who's an ideas guy, and I
Yeah.
use the term guy as a gender
Yeah.
neutral term,
Yeah.
might be susceptible to presenting every idea.
Right.
And then the second thing is, you know, when you do have ideas, it's very wise to do a little research around the idea to see, has this been proposed before? Has it been
Mm,
tried before? Here has been tried elsewhere. What resources might be involved? Who would have to make these decisions? Who would have to do the heavy lifting? What would be
mm,
lost? What would be gained? Now, in doing that, you do two things. One, you vet the idea for yourself. You
mm-hmm.
see, because a lot of times you say, oh, gee, I guess that wasn't such a great idea.
Right.
I mean, it sounded good, but sometimes it's not as good an idea as it sounds like,
Right.
right? Um, but so once you've vetted the idea and determined that, hey, this is a pretty good idea,
Right.
then the good news is you'll also have done sufficient research to support a brief proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And what I always tell people is master the art of the proposal,
Mm-hmm.
and master the art of a brief proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Here's the idea. Here are the pros and cons of it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I've learned in my research. A quick sketch.
Mm-hmm.
Here's when it was tried. Here's why it didn't work then and why it
Mm,
would work now. Or
mm-hmm.
here's where it has worked and why.
Right.
Here's who would have to be involved and what they'd have to do, what it would cost, what it would save. And by the way, here's the role I propose for myself in implementing.
Right. That's great. Yeah,
Right?
because I think it answers all the unanswered questions. Because whenever someone says new, it's like, well, where are you going to get the money? Who's
Yeah.
going to do this? How is it going to fit in with all these other pieces? And so if you do the research beforehand and pre-anticipate the questions and already answer
Yeah.
those questions, it kind of makes it easier for the person to say yes.
And by the way, even if the person says no, the person is likely to think, hmm, you know, this person who's proposing the idea, you're pretty thorough.
Right. Like
You
they've at least they didn't come up with, yeah, we can't do it now for whatever reasons, or, we did try it and that was a good idea, but at least that person is really thinking through it from a business perspective at the right level of
exactly
information. Yeah,
right.
it's
So they might
interesting.
say, I don't like the idea, but I like the way you think,
Yeah.
right? And that's pretty good too.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this gentleman, when this gentleman who came to me to get coached, and he had this particular scenario, what I had him do is I had him watch when people were giving, because a lot of people were presenting ideas because they're in R&D. That's part of what
Right, right,
R&D and
right.
engineering is part of what they had to do. And I said I would actually, it's like a poker game. I would start sitting in the meeting and seeing people presenting, and you'll start getting cues like when the no is about to come. It will either be like this or like that or and like start diagnosing like the kind of questions that they're asking, because that will give you a sense of their internal processes, how they make decisions, and the kinds of things that they're thinking of, so that you can do the research just like you were talking
Right.
about, so that you can actually do the research and before come prepared. And so start understanding the different players in the room and how they make decisions and who's making decisions and what the pecking order is, because generally there's an order in which decisions are making. There's the decision maker, and then there are people who or so on paper is the decision maker, but then there are people who are really making the decisions that you don't even
Right.
know that are. So
Well,
that
that's
was
very
my
good
piece of
advice, I think.
advice. Yeah, but I think it's a combination of that, and I like your idea of just being really well researched, because, and I think that the questions that you ask, like, has it been done before? Those kinds of things, I think often people don't, even if they say, oh, yeah, it has, but it's totally different. It will work this time. It's like, well, yeah, but no, like, it's a logical question to ask. Like, well, what happened when it was done before? What would
Right.
have been, what are you going to do differently to prevent the negative or positive, negative outcome that occurred, right? Because if it was done before, probably had a negative outcome if they didn't pursue it. Okay, so another idea. BFF, people who are like, I really want to be, and this you see a lot. I think in the younger generation, I see this more often, because there's no longer this kind of authoritative, I manage you, you report to me, that kind of scenario. So if your manager wants to be your best friend, it's like, and they don't tell you the hard news, they don't manage you, they kind of aren't really doing their job. What do you do in those situations?
Well, I mean, I think there's two aspects to it, right? There's the work aspect of it and then the non-work aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the work aspect of it, it's just really important to get candid feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to not just say, "Hey, I'm brave. I can take it." I want to know how I'm really doing in relation to expectations,
Mm,
and I want to know what I need to do to exceed expectations, to go the extra mile,
mm-hmm.
and accelerate my development and my path to recognition and rewards. Like, give it to me straight. But
Right.
then when you if you get some straight feedback, then you can't crumble. You have to demonstrate that
Why
in
did you
fact you
say
can
that
take
to
it.
me?
Right,
Yeah. I don't want to be
right,
friends with you anymore. Okay.
right. So you got to be true to your word on that. So
Yeah.
regardless of whether you're fake friends, real friends, or you're just trying to be polite and this person's trying to be your friend and you're just trying not to hurt their feelings. In
Right.
any, in any of those scenarios, the first thing you have to protect is this is your career, this is your livelihood, this is your opportunity to earn take care of your family,
Right.
contribute to the mission, right? So the first thing you got to do is make sure you're getting what you need in terms of clear expectations and real feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the next part is a little more delicate, which is, my own view is that the smartest office politics, the smartest workplace politics, is to try to keep your relationships at work professional
Mm-hmm.
and not muddy them up with the interpersonal complexities of
Mm-hmm.
trying to be friends with someone who has power over you at work,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a sticky thing. Now, if you're real friends and you care about the friendship, okay, don't fool yourself. This is going to be a complication. The fact that this person has power in relation to your career and livelihood
Hmm.
That is going to be a complicated
Right.
friendship,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, if the friendship is important to you, you got to really protect the friendship. And the best thing you can do to protect a real friendship is make sure you get clear expectations and then exceed them, right?
Hmm.
Make sure you get honest feedback and then act on it.
Hmm.
Do not try to take advantage of the fact that your boss is your friend and try to resist being taken advantage of. Try to keep your work relationship as clean and work focused as you possibly can
Hmm.
so that outside of work, your friendship is protected.
Hmm.
That's with a real friend.
Hmm.
With a fake friend, then it's just a matter of you shoot the breeze a little, but if you shoot the breeze too much, then all of a sudden it's going to take up your time and you're not going to be able to get enough work done. So some people at work, and sometimes they're your boss, they participate in everybody else's break.
Right.
And they're going around, they're taking up everyone's break, right? Oh, your turn to talk to me and
Right.
entertain me, right? To me, that means that person doesn't have enough work to do,
Right.
right? Gee, maybe I should assign you some tasks.
Right.
But again, then these sort of fake workplace friendships. My advice is be cordial. One thing you can say is, "Hey, gee, I so enjoyed talking with you about what was on television last night, but after all, I'm really busy trying to get all my tasks, responsibilities, and projects done here. So gosh, maybe when I wrap up work, it looks like now that we've been talking, that's going to be more like 7. But when I wrap up work, maybe we should go out for a beer and talk about this stuff."
Right.
And that's when you find out the boss doesn't like you that much. No, no, I'm just killing time at work. I don't want to go out for a beer with you after work.
Well,
Right.
I
Uh,
wonder whether I'm trying to figure out diagnose what is actually causing the boss to do that. And I would imagine that there'd be a couple different things. One is that nowadays a lot of the management books will talk about it's important to have relationships with your employees, and they don't really know what that constitutes, right? Like they
yeah.
don't know what it means to relate to someone. So that could be one thing. The other thing I can think of why that would happen would be because a person doesn't like conflict, and so they always want to be friends. They always have to be liked, and if they're not
Yeah.
liked, it causes them a great deal of distress because that whole purpose of their life is to be liked. So in those cases, like in the first case where they read it in some management book or they keep on being told you need to relate to people and they're like, well, I guess I'll talk to them about their whatever, the TV show.
Right.
So I don't really know how. I think the first one is easier to remedy. The second one is harder, I think, when you have someone who's a conflict avoider.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, look, a lot of managers are either getting bad advice or they're misunderstanding the advice, and somehow, my view is building false rapport with people serves no purpose,
right,
right? So if it's fake, it's fake,
right.
and what you have in common, if you're not real friends, right? Most of what you have in common is work.
Mm-hmm.
So the good news is you can build rapport by talking about the work.
Mm,
And so one thing you can do when the boss comes in is say, "Yeah, I didn't watch Walking Dead last night, but look, I'm working on this project, and I could really use you as a sounding board. I'd like to bounce some things off of you." Right.
right.
So
That's a
that
great
that
idea.
right, that's immediately turning the conversation to work. And
Right.
by the way, you can do that with colleagues who do too much talking also.
Yeah.
Just try to turn the conversation to the work. Sometimes you say, "Golly, by the way, I always find the best way to uh, uh, start a conversation when you're about to say something awkward is to say gosh or golly first. That's always, so say, "Golly, I've got a tight deadline today.
Right.
I'm not sure if I'm going to have enough time to get all this stuff done. So
Right.
I really need to focus on that, right? On this."
Right.
So that's one thing you can say. But another conversational technique is to just immediately turn the conversation to work. And if somebody, I mean, then there are further levels of that, right? So what some people have told me, and I think this is a great technique, and we teach it as an extreme response, is, take out your notepad and start taking notes. Well, we're talking about Walking Dead. Yeah, but I mean, we're all so busy here. I assume this is very quickly I'm gonna see the connection to the project I'm working on. So I thought I better write this stuff down. It's oh no, I'm just wasting your time.
Right.
Oh,
Oh, that's so funny. Well, the other thing that I've noticed, so rapport, like, if we're talking and we have rapport, it looks like this. If I go like this, that's like an instant, like that gives someone the visual cue that like I'm done. Like somehow, open body, closed body. So somehow
yeah,
just even subtle cues, or you close your notebook, or you put your jacket on, you're like, I got to go to the next meeting, or you create something. I got to go to the bathroom, or you do something
right.
to just like truncate it. That would be
Yeah, and you
that would
can
be
do
my
that.
tip, I think. If you
You can
have
do
kind of a
that. I mean,
talker.
it might seem a little bit passive aggressive, and I mean, I guess no more so than starting to take notes
You know,
when somebody's talking about
these
their
are
program.
extreme measures, but I'm just
Right, right,
well,
right,
someone and what's surprising is sometimes I'll do that when I'm working with a client where I'm like, God, I have to end, and I'm trying to give them like visual cues, like it's time to roll, things up, and
right.
like, or I'll even say like, we have a couple minutes before, so I'd like to summarize, and then they launch into some gigantic topic, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and so like I can't cover that topic in the five
Right,
minutes that we have left, and so I'll
right.
just do things like I'll close my notebook or like give them visual cues that okay,
Yeah,
we're
or
done
hey,
here.
let me take a few notes on this because I got a hard stop at 3, so I guess we'll have to, maybe we can. This
Resume
is
next time we see.
where we can pick up the next time
Yeah.
we meet.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
another one. And another kind of extreme response. The extreme ones are fun, right? Because they're funny. But another extreme response that I think is in the book is if your boss, keeps just shooting the breeze with you, say, golly, I've got so much to do here. I'm not sure I can get it all done, but it looks like you have some time on your hands. Maybe you could help me.
That's extreme, but I love it. I love it. Okay, so what do you do with someone who just can't stand conflict? They're never, you have something where they have to like make a decision, and it's going to be, and sometimes when you make a decision, someone's going to lose and someone's going to win. And even that notion of having that happen and being responsible as a boss is really hard for them. So they want to be liked. And so this is their they don't make hard tough decisions, those kind of things. What would you do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. Look, all of the techniques that we teach uh, take into account the fact that there's a power differential,
Right.
right? And so there are always limits to what you can do to force a decision. But what you can do is, so it's a version of the proposal technique,
Hmm.
and that is to come in and say, decision A, pros and cons, decision B, pros and cons, and here are the pros and cons of no decision.
Ah, I
Here's what will
love that.
happen.
That's a
Here's what will
great
happen
idea.
if no decision happens.
Right.
And because what sometimes people who are very indecisive don't realize that making no decision is still taking an action. It will
Hmm.
still cause certain outcomes to be more likely than others.
Hmm.
And so there's decision A, decision B, and no decision. And here
Right.
are the pros and cons of each.
I
And that
love
that
that.
sometimes is a way to force a decision.
Right. Or to even put a deadline on the decision. I think when there's no deadline on the decision, it kind of floats around into, well, I'll make up my mind sometime. But I think that because you have the consequences of no decision, then that becomes
Yeah,
really clear. So when you don't
yeah, and
decide, yeah.
yeah, and it's good to have a deadline, but again, when you don't have the power, the boss say, no, no, that's not necessary. The deadline, you know. So, uh, right, that's the problem is I'm in
Right.
charge. No, there's no deadline.
Right. Unless there's some
Unless,
financial consequence, right? Like if we don't get
yeah,
this, if you don't decide whether I can go to this conference or not, the
right,
price is going to go up in the next 2 weeks by $1,000. So
yeah, or
that's why I think
there's
no.
some external consequence, right?
Right.
So no decision is like deciding I can't go because then I'm not going to go, and here will be the consequence.
Right.
Then I won't learn these things that are being taught at these workshops. And remember, one of our goals was for me to develop professionally and develop these new skills.
Right.
So if you don't make the decision, it's tantamount to deciding I can't go.
Right.
And the deadline for registering is tomorrow.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Got it. I love it. I love the idea of the cost of no decision. That's the first time I've heard that. It's such a great idea. Okay, how about situations where you have someone who's mentally volatile? I've had situations like where clients have said, "I have a boss," and they're kind of like they'll just start screaming expletives and start saying the most awful things to people. And it's not just me; they do it to everyone. You're such a moron. Why did you do that? How could you even come up with a stupid proposal? Just awful, awful, awful kind of things like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, my view is that I'm just going to assume that this is far enough over the line that it falls into the category of being in an abusive relationship.
Right.
And when you're reporting to somebody that person has power over you, and that person is behaving in an abusive manner, again, now the first thing I want to say is, you got to get out of that abusive relationship. But sometimes people don't have that luxury.
Right.
And so, your first thing you have to do is decide how bad is the impact? How bad is the abuse? How much is it harming you? And what some people decide, oh, okay, just recognizing this person is an abuser does a lot of the work for me of protecting my ego and my feelings.
Right.
Because I know
me. Right. Yeah.
it's not me, it's you, right? And everybody knows you're a jerk, right? So, and so, at least you've got that, that you're thinking to yourself, everyone knows you're a jerk and it's not me.
Right.
So now, having said that, some people are still traumatized by being exposed to that kind of behavior. And so, if it reaches a certain level, again, you want to start documenting that. There might be recourse by going to that person's boss, or by going to HR, or at the extreme level, because I work for employers, not for employees. I always hesitate to make this recommendation, but sometimes you got to go to a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, if it's abusive, especially if it's sexual abuse, or someone makes
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are certain thresholds past which my advice to anyone would be, you got to get out of that relationship,
right.
And you've got to seek a remedy.
Right.
That's an extraordinary remedy.
Right. Right. And I think that I actually have had people. I worked in a mostly male-dominated environment where people would just pull crap that was just off the hinge. And I'd go up to him. I'm like, I remember going to someone who pulled some type of thing like that to me, and I went after the meeting to his office, and I said, that was unacceptable, what you did. And here's what you did. And here's why it's unacceptable. And I never want to see that happen again. And I think he was terrified. He was terrified. But
Right.
He was just so off the hinge. Like, what he did was just unacceptable. And no one had ever said to him, that's just ridiculous. Like, you can't
Right.
treat me that way. Like, that's not okay. Right? Because it's part of it is if you're in an abusive relationship, it's because you're allowing the abuse to occur, I think, as well. And I think it's hard because if you're really dealing with someone who is mentally not well, that type of confrontation may not go well. But oftentimes people are just being abusive because they're just rushed, or, whatever. Like, it kind of gives them a wake up call. Like, whoa. Like, someone just came to my office and said, like, when you did this, I was just so, I remember saying, I was so angry at you, and here's why, and I just never want to see that again. And if I do see that again, this is what I'm going to do. And and this was a peer, right? So it wasn't actually a boss, which I think with the boss, that'd be really hard. But as a peer, I think it's possible to say, like, it's not okay.
I mean, look, if you're on the verge of quitting, if you're on the verge of going to HR, if you're on the verge of going to the boss's boss or going to seek legal support, then maybe your first stop should be that kind of a confrontation. Because if you're already willing to walk away,
right.
essentially, or take some action, then maybe you can go try to do a confrontation. I mean,
Yeah.
in almost every case, my advice is, within all the bounds of good manners and respecting authority as best you possibly can, and protecting yourself, candor is surprisingly effective in many cases.
Yeah. Well, sometimes because sometimes people and I don't know, maybe I'm just a rebel, but I had something when I was working in GE where the head of the whole division had said something awful about one of my employees, and I just said, that's just not cool. Like, you just completely diminish this woman's 40 years of work here, and I would really like you to apologize to her. Which, and everyone was like, "What? Like, what? Why are you doing that?" But I just thought, no, no, that's not okay. And it was interesting because he was a very powerful person, and no one had ever stepped. And I was like 21 when I was managing this group, and I think he was really shocked. But sometimes people need to be told that what they're doing is not okay, and they'll respect you more. You feel afraid, but in some ways, from that moment on, that guy respected me more than probably anyone in that whole organization,
Right.
because I just pointed out what was just clearly not a ethical thing to do, or the right thing to do. Um,
Right.
so I think it's hard. It's really hard to know. And sometimes I'm a risk all kind of person, so I pull stuff like that. But I don't know. That may not be it for everyone. But okay. So what do you do when you have a slave driver? We have a couple more minutes. I think we have maybe two more scenarios. If someone's a slave driver, they're constantly like calling you during the weekends. They have no boundaries whatsoever. What are some good tactics for that?
Well, again, first you have to do kind of a cost benefit analysis. What is it? Are there time limits to this? Is it that, you have to do this for 2 years and then there's a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow?
Right.
Sometimes
Right.
that's the case, right? So then what you're doing is you're making a big investment and we all know we could name lots of jobs where, yeah, what's expected is you're going to work 100 hours a week,
Right.
and in 2 years you're going to get a promotion, and
Right.
then you're going to make the big bucks, right? It's,
Right.
the investment banks, for example,
Lawyers,
right? Or if you're
doctors.
at, you mentioned GE, if you're in the GE audit program,
Right.
you're gonna work 100 hours a week for
Right.
the foreseeable
And
future,
travel
and
all the time.
yeah, and there will be, there will be a big payoff, right? So one thing is, if you decide, yeah, that's what I'm doing, and then buckle down, right? If it's beyond the boundaries of the job that you understood, right? Then I think it's fair to go and say, gee, let me make sure I understand the parameters here, and because I've been keeping track, and gosh, I'm working, set see say gosh before something difficult.
Right.
I'm working 70, 80, 90 hours a week, and that's a lot more than I had understood it to be. So you might make a pitch that, I'm willing to do this, but the rewards are not sufficient as the job is currently framed. That's a possibility,
Yep.
right? Another possibility is you just run interference,
Hmm.
right? And running interference, and your best bet, if you're going to run interference, to do that but while simultaneously meeting and exceeding all the expectations. So you're getting every task, responsibility, and project done, right? You're meeting every deadline, you're checking every box, you're getting it all done. If you're doing that, right, you're turning in your reports on time, your documents are all up to date, you're meeting and exceeding all of your expectations,
Hmm.
then I think it's reasonable, to put your telephone in the refrigerator when you go home, and or whatever,
Right.
unplug your computer, unplug yourself, and one of the ways to do that is to just get in the habit of sending a note to your boss saying, um, I'll be unavailable from 7 o'clock Friday, and this week, just take it one day at a time.
Right.
I'll be unavailable from 7 o'clock till 7 o'clock, and then I'll check in with you tomorrow at 7. In other words, you still create a framework where there's a window that you make yourself available, but then you check in at 7. need anything right now? I've got some time to talk now. I'll be unavailable again from 8 Saturday till 7 o'clock Sunday. So this is the window,
Right.
and you need to like train the boss,
Mm.
uh, and then you want to make part of training the boss is to make sure that by following your format, the boss gets his or her needs met.
Right.
You know, and
I'm just imagining a puppy where you actually they say when you're doing the training of the dogs, you have like a little paper and you're training the dog to go on the piece of paper or whatever
right,
so that they know like this is the little square in which you operate. And I'll tell you, so that they know. Similar kind of thing.
exactly,
Really just setting
yeah,
very, very clear boundaries and
which
training your boss so that they know what your boundaries are, but being respectful about it, saying, hey, I'm going to be gone, and kind of winding them down from,
yeah,
maybe if they want to call you, they want you to be available all weekend to say, I'll be available at 7 in the morning on Saturday and
right,
then on Sunday, or and then maybe weaning them down to I'm going to be available on Monday at 7, but to
right,
just give them a sense of what your boundaries are and kind of slowly shrink down their kind of out of control asking you to do things all the time.
yeah, and you have to make sure that you're getting the boss's needs met. And look, there are two scenarios where that doesn't work.
Hmm.
If you're like a firefighter or an emergency room
Right,
doctor or something, right?
right,
You can't disappear, right? Your job is to be available, to be
right,
on call,
right.
right? The other is if what you are to your boss is a back end call assistant, and then you got to make sure, like, hey, wait a minute, that's what I'm signed up for, so you got to make peace with that, or you got to say, yeah, that's not what I'm not doing it.
Right. Right. I love it. I think we've almost hit every single type. This has been fabulous. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Uh,
For folks out there,
Thank you.
we've been talking to Bruce Tolgan, and we've been talking about some of the ideas in his book. It's okay to manage your boss, and it sounds like you actually have training too. So tell us about the training that you have and who it's for and how people participate.
Yeah, I mean, all of our on-site training is done through companies. Companies hire us to
Hmm.
come in and train managers mostly, and then a lot of times once we train managers, we come in and train the employees how to handle their side of the equation.
Right.
And we also have it's okay to manage your bosses available in the form of video training, a series of short video lessons that are
Oh, very
uh,
cool.
yeah. So that's how we do that.
And how do people reach him? Tell us your website.
It's rainmakerthinking.com.
Excellent.
Rainmakerthinking.com. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Yeah, thank you.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.